What's up everyone, welcome back to my channel for another true crime video. Thank you so much to everyone that sent me well wishes and sent me nice messages about my health. Last week I wasn't feeling well, so I did have to take a bit of a break, and I hope that you guys are also taking care of yourselves. I hope that you're not putting too much strain on yourself, whether it be physical, mental, especially during this time, during this pandemic. I really hope that you are taking care of yourself, staying indoors and just staying healthy. So in our last video we spoke about Bulelani Mabai. Ooh, I don't know, I pronounced his name wrong throughout the entirety of that video. Anyway, in that video at the end I spoke a bit about culture and the influence of culture, or the perception and the influence of culture on crimes, but specifically the perception of serial murders in relation to culture. And a couple of people asked me to do a video where I touched a little bit more on the cultural aspects of crimes, and this is kind of that video. So today we will be talking about the infamous Sugarcane Killer, Thozamile Taki. Before we get into it, I do want to give my usual disclaimer that by making this video I mean absolutely no disrespect to any of the victims or the families affected by this case. This video is purely for educational purposes and to give the audience more information about the case. Thozamile Taki was born in Majola, Port St. John's, which is actually in the Eastern Cape, and he was born in 1971. For the most part, our case takes place in KwaZulu-Natal, but Taki was born and partly raised in the Eastern Cape province. He was the oldest of 4 children, and when he was 19 years old, his father deserted the family completely and they never saw or heard from him again. The topic of fatherlessness is a pretty controversial one in South Africa, and I think it's controversial due to the lack of accountability, but also because of the implications or the perceived implications of fatherlessness in South Africa, or fatherlessness in general actually. If you go on Twitter, for example, the most common insult that is hurled at women is that their children have no fathers, and these are statements said by men and even other women who also had no fathers or are absent fathers themselves. According to Stats SA's Deputy Director for Service Delivery Statistics, Casmans Mahlwele, in order to be considered a resident of a household, a biological father needs to spend at least 4 nights on average per week for 4 weeks living there. With this statement in mind, a 2017 survey found that the biological father of 61.8% of children younger than the age of 18 could not be considered residents of the household and were therefore absent. A much larger 2016 community survey conducted by Stats SA estimated a much higher figure of 64.1%. Of that 64%, 8.7% of children younger than 18 were fatherless due to death, so their fathers had passed away, and the remaining 55.4% had biological fathers that were alive but did not live with them. These statistics are very jarring, but this is solely based on biological fathers. It does not consider men that perform caregiving functions as fathers. And as alarming as these numbers are, it's also important to understand that these figures exclude children whose biological fathers are alive but still play a role in their upbringing, or other men in these children's lives that may play a parental fatherly role. Being a single parent is by no means an easy task, and trying to raise a boy into manhood as a single mother can only be more difficult. It's important to understand family dynamics when studying child rearing, but it's also important to understand these dynamics when looking at the influences or the factors that make a serial killer. If you do want more information about the making of a serial killer, I would highly recommend you check out Rachel Shannon's mini-series on the topic. I will have that linked for you in the description box. But going back to Taki and his life before his crimes, after the departure of his father, Taki and his siblings were left to the care of their sickly mother, who would subsequently pass away in the same year that their father left. In school, he wasn't a high achieving student, having only gone up to standard 2, which is now known as grade 4 in his formal education. Despite not being formally educated, he was by no means an idiot. He was actually pretty intelligent. He was of average or even slightly above average intelligence throughout his whole life. On the 23rd of January 1997, Taki was convicted of housebreaking with intent to steal and theft. For this, he was sentenced to 3 years imprisonment. His second arrest and conviction came on the 25th of February 1999. So this was literally right after he was released from prison for his first crime. And this time he was found guilty of robbery and sentenced to 5 years imprisonment. In 2004, his fiancée, Vusiwe Daniso, gave birth to their first child. 2 years later, in 2006, she gave birth to their second child. By June of 2007, however, the pair had broken up and they'd broken off their engagement after Daniso found him with another woman in Chatsworth when she paid him an unannounced visit. He was neither a breadwinner nor a resident of the house where his 2 children lived, so under the aforementioned definition, Taki could be considered an absent father. Taki was active for less than a year in 2007 before his capture, so law enforcement on this case, or most parts of this case, they were really on top of things. And don't congratulate a fish for swimming, but at the same time, give credit where it's due. Although he was only active from February to September of 2007, he did still manage to claim the lives of 13 victims. But through all of this, there was a survivor, Dudu Ndeta, and she would later testify against him at his trial. Due to how close together his kills were, you may sometimes see him referred to as a spree killer. So don't be surprised when you look him up and instead of seeing him as a serial killer, you see him being referred to as a spree killer. Like I said, he did have 13 victims, and I'm not going to go over every single murder individually. There are some aspects from the murders that I will touch on as a whole, but generally I'll just give an overview of what he did. Even though I'm not going to go through every single murder individually, I still do want to give the names of the victims, because at the end of the day, these are the lives that we should be celebrating. These are the lives that we should be remembering. These are the people whose names and faces should stay alive in our hearts. And yeah, these are the people whose life stories we should be sharing. So I'm going to tell you the names of the victims. They're in no particular order other than the fact that I have grouped them together based on where the victims were from. So some victims are from the same area, so that's just how I've separated them. I've just grouped them together like that. So yeah, these are the names of his victims. We had Makosi Mgobozi, Nonjabulo Mbanza, and Pilisiwe Mbanza from Efolweni. I couldn't find any information to either confirm or deny if Nonjabulo and Pilisiwe were related, so I'm not sure about that. There was also Nokolo Mbande, Rose Mjoli, and Kanyisile Ngayana from Bizana, Thandazile Bogota and Siziwe Chongaye from Lusikisiki, Nosiza Nozozo from Liberty, I think it's pronounced, Charity Mtetwa from Dongat, Tandeka Mtebeni from Matatiela, Nombali Ngobo from Umzinyathi, and Charity Kumalo from Gwamashu. All these women were between the ages of 18 and 25 years old. 11 of these women were dumped in the Shaya Moya sugarcane plantations around the town of Umzinto in KZN, and the remaining 2 victims were dumped in the Guamajola tea plantation, which was in Port St. John's in the Eastern Cape. He had 13 confirmed victims, but according to Taki, he had actually killed 15 people. During the course of the investigation, he allegedly told police and investigators that he had killed a man, dismembered him, and sold parts of his body to a traditional healer in the area. With the remaining parts of his body that he had not sold, he had thrown them over a cliff in Port St. John. So this was all allegedly, according to Taki. So this is that bit about culture or tradition playing a role in murder. With South Africa being so culturally and ethnically diverse, there will be a lot of different cultural practices, but obviously some of these practices we will see overlap in them. So I'm going to explain this from the viewpoint of the dominant ethnic group in the area where majority of these crimes took place, which is the KZN. And just so that I'm not explaining cultural practices of every single ethnicity in South Africa, just to clarify, I'm not at all saying that murder is a common or an acceptable practice in any culture in South Africa, in any ethnic group in South Africa. It's very much not condoned. Nobody likes murder, nobody supports murder, nobody promotes murder. No ethnic group in South Africa supports and promotes murder or celebrates murder. Our case takes place in KwaZulu-Natal, coastal province in South Africa, where the main ethnic group that lives there is that of the Zulu people. Just as with the Xhosa people we mentioned last time, Zulu people are very proud of their culture, they're very proud of their heritage, and they want to preserve their heritage. And one example of how their heritage is being celebrated and preserved is through the existence of traditional healers. I would say that there are two different types of traditional healers, specifically in the Zulu community, one being inyanga and the other being a sangoma. They are actually not interchangeable. They perform very different functions. They qualify in completely different ways as well. Traditionally, inyanga is a male, whereas a sangoma can be either male or female. Besides that distinction, inyanga is more so concerned with treating physical illness or the physical manifestation of spiritual illness, whereas a sangoma is concerned with the ancestral realm, and they heal people through divination and are also considered to be clairvoyant. We actually have spoken about a sangoma serial killer on this channel before, Jack Mochale, so if you haven't checked out that video yet, I will link it in the iCard so that it's easier for you to find. Being a sangoma is a calling. I think the best way to describe it to my Western audience is that it's sort of like being a psychic. You don't train to be a psychic, just as you're not taught, okay, you are taught to be a sangoma, but you are, how can I explain this? It's not being a sangoma. You need to obviously learn the practices of being a sangoma, but not just anybody can be a sangoma. It's not like being an engineer, for example. Anyone can wake up one day and decide that they want to study engineering and be an engineer. No one can wake up one day and be like, okay, I'm bored with my life, I want to be a sangoma and be a sangoma. That's not how it works. It's very much, you are chosen by your ancestors to be the voice of your ancestors. That's the way that I'm going to describe it. That's the best way to describe it. You're chosen by your ancestors to be the voice of your ancestors. I hope that makes sense. It's your ancestors speaking through you. So not just anybody has their ancestors speaking through them. It's I think I've explained it enough that it's your ancestors speaking through you. Not just anybody can do it. We're going to move on. Anyway, inyanga, in the very, very basic, back to traditional, back to before Jan van Riebeeck and friends landed, inyanga is an inheritance. It's a traditional inheritance. It was traditionally passed down. It was a practice of naturopathy, traditionally passed down from father to son in the tribe. So each tribe had inyang, had a designated inyang, and that was the person that was responsible for the health of the tribe. They were the tribe's doctor. And you will notice that I'm not putting doctor in air quotations, and that is because inyanga is considered to be part of the South African healthcare system. So you're not a professional doctor, but you are a health practitioner. How this ties into what this video is actually about is, like I said, it is a practice of naturopathy, meaning that they use plants and animal parts in their remedies and in their treatment regimen. In modern times, a sangoma does typically perform both the function of being a sangoma and being inyanga, and that's kind of why they've been molded together into this singular term of being a traditional healer. There's no real and clear distinction, but traditionally there is a distinction. Taki is not the first person to sell off body parts of his victims to a traditional healer, and in fact there was, and in some places there still is, a huge problem where people living with albinism are targeted by black market traditional trading. There was a misconception that people living with albinism were immortal, and there are quite a few cases where they have been murdered so their body parts could be sold to traditional healers. If you want me to do a case dedicated to people living with albinism, let me know by giving this video a thumbs up. I have a whole list of all the cases that you've suggested and I will get to them. It's a long list. Going back to the case, however, Taki allegedly claimed to have killed another person whom he buried in a shallow grave. None of these alleged victims have ever been found, and quite honestly I don't believe that they exist. I don't believe that Taki killed two men, simply because his victim profile was specifically young black unemployed women. So it's very strange to me that he would at any point in time change his victim profile to include men. It's very rare that a serial killer kills more than one type of victim. We have covered a serial killer that killed more than one type of victim. That was Stuart Vulcan, but he already started off by killing more than one type of victim. So in the case of a serial killer changing his victim profile, it's very rare, especially in the short span of time that Taki was active. Since we are already on the topic, let's go ahead and talk about Taki's victim profile and his modus operandi. Taki targeted young, black, typically unemployed women between the ages of 18 and 25 years old. The high rates of unemployment in South Africa leave so many people vulnerable to victimization, and the most vulnerable group who are often targets of labor and sex trafficking are young women. I do have a video where I talk extensively about unemployment in South Africa, so I won't rehash it in this one. Taki would lure his victim by pretending to be an employment agent, recruiting for companies including Hewlett, Nestle, Ilovo, Sezela, and Toyota. He told his victims that these companies were situated in Umzinto in the KZN, and he also told his victims that in order to secure employment they would need to pay him a employment rental fee anywhere between 300 and 3,000 rand. Through Ndeta's testimony, it was discovered that part of his modus operandi was to get his victims to pay for his fare in the taxi to Umzinto. So he told his victims that since he was getting them a job, he was going to get them employment, they had to pay for his taxi fare, and unbeknownst to these women, they were basically paying to be left to their deaths. Taki did not always travel with one victim at a time. Sometimes he did travel with two victims at a time. And when he did travel with two victims at a time, this was the case with Ndeta and her friend Nombali Ngobo, what he would do is that he would find a way to separate the victims at the Umzinto CBD, and this allowed him to harm them separately. Because of how badly decomposed the bodies were, a cause of death could not be determined by autopsy alone on 11 of the 13 victims. So investigators, the coroners, the pathologists, they had to rely on other evidence in order to figure out what Taki had done to these women. Two of the victims, their causes of death were head injuries or compression injuries to the neck and multiple injuries due to blunt trauma. The other victims died by way of strangulation. After taking their lives, Taki would rob these women and he would return home using the money he had stolen from them. Like I said at the beginning, Taki was not active for a very long time. He started his killing spree in February, and on the 24th of September 2007, he was arrested and remanded in Westerville prison. His girlfriend, Hlengiwe Nene, was also arrested as an accomplice. Taki had actually started killing women a month before he and Hlengiwe got involved. And it really sucks that she was involved in all of this. It really sucks that she was initially implicated in these murders, because she had nothing to do with it. She had no idea that he was doing any of this. She had no part in what he was doing, and she spent more than 2 years in a prison for something that she didn't even do. In 2010, Nene was released from custody as there was no evidence linking her to the crime. But obviously, with the way things are in our society, everybody wants to be judged during execution, and even though she was found not guilty, she was completely acquitted of these charges, her life was still in danger for the first couple of months after her release. In fact, when she left the courthouse on the day of her acquittal, she had to be led out in the back of a police van, and they had to like have a decoy. She had to be led on the back of the police van because at the front of the courthouse there were women waiting to be nasty to her. They were just blaming her for something that she had no involvement in. Also in 2010, Taki tried to escape from police custody. On the 21st of February, he and 8 other prisoners attempted to escape from the prison. During the escape attempt, Taki fell from the roof of his 4th floor prison cell, which resulted in serious injuries that left him in a wheelchair. His accomplices, they did successfully escape from the prison. However, he was the only one that failed at this. He was the only one that did not manage to escape. Because of his injury, his trial was postponed until the 30th of April. When he tried to escape, the trial was almost over. He had been on trial for 2 years now, since 2008, since like the end of 2007, beginning of 2008. So he had already been on trial for quite a while. And the trial was almost over as 95 of the state's 103 witnesses had already testified. So there was only 8 witnesses left to testify, and he just prolonged his conviction and sentencing by attempting to escape. During the trial, he showed no remorse. He would smile, snigger, and laugh when the families were giving account of when the families were testifying, when investigators were testifying. He would smile when they were recounting what he had done. He found pleasure in re-traumatizing the families, in re-traumatizing these victims. On the 23rd of December 2010, Thozamile Taki was convicted of all 26 counts against him, which were 13 counts of robbery with aggravating circumstances and 13 counts of murder. On the 19th of January 2011, Judge King Ndlovu sentenced 40-year-old Thozamile Taki to 16 years imprisonment for each count of robbery and life imprisonment on each count of murder. This was effectively 13 life sentences plus a total of 208 years imprisonment, which was to run concurrently with the life sentences. And according to South African law, multiple life sentences are also supposed to run concurrently. I don't see the point in that, but I digress. Judge Ndlovu also advised that the Department of Correctional Services refrain from ever considering Taki for release on parole. Although Judge Ndlovu said that he should not be eligible for parole, recent news stories have shown that these judgments aren't always taken into consideration, and he could very well be released. And I truly believe that if he is released, he will reoffend. All relevant stakeholders welcomed his sentencing, with the ANC Provincial Secretary Sihle Zikalala stating that the ANC believes the judgment handed down by Judge King Ndlovu against Mr. Taki will serve as a deterrent to women abusers, and even reinforcing that those who abuse women have no place in our society, which I completely agree with. No one who abuses anybody, whether it be man, woman, or child, has any place in our society. With all of that said, that does bring us to the end of this case. For once, I can't say anything bad about the police work. They actually did a good job. They did their job, which is more than I can say for a lot of other departments in South Africa, Eskom. Yeah, let me know what you guys think of this case. Let me know what you think of prisoners being let out on parole after committing multiple murders. Let me know if you want me to cover that traditional healer case, the one with albinism. Let me know about that. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you did find it interesting, please do give it a thumbs up. And if you want to see more videos like this, go ahead and subscribe to my channel and click the bell so that you get notified every single time I upload. Once again, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.